Hello, you are watching Economy by Bhushan Jalali, a subset of Nancy Foundation. Today we have chosen the topic inflation. So, what is inflation? Inflation is a sustained, or we can say persistent, increase in prices across the board in an economy that is called inflation. So, when there is increase in prices across the board for a persisting period, we call that phenomenon as an inflation. That means, in a layman's language, when the prices of the goods and services increase, that is called inflation. When the prices fall as compared to some previous month or some other fixed day or previous year, we call it as a deflation or disinflation. The inflation is always measured from point to point. If we measure what were the prices as on yesterday, then compare it with the prices as on the same day of the previous month or of the previous year. That's how the inflation is measured. Now the point is, what are the reasons for inflation? Inflation is because of two reasons. One is called by increase in demand. We call that demand pull inflation. And the second is called cost push inflation. When the cost of the commodities, cost of the goods and services increases, we call inflation because of the increase in the costs of the goods. Sometimes it is because of the demand. When demand is more than the supply, then the prices of the goods increase. We call that demand pull inflation. So, how we can check inflation? So, we can check inflation, we have to address both these reasons. If it is from inflation is due to some problem with supply side, or it is because of some cost of the goods, then the problem can be addressed accordingly. For example, if it is because of supply side, government may go for import of short-term as a short-term remedy. Suppose supply goods are not available as compared to demand. So, for a short-term respite in the inflation, government can go for import of goods. But for longer term, government can think for the plans, for the policies, for long-term policies, that is increase in production, increase in storage capacities, transportation facilities and distribution facilities. These type of measures check inflation. When there is inflation because of the cost side, government can do it can render to short-term measures as cut in taxes, custom duties. For long-term measures, government may arrange for better production processes, technological innovations, production incentive schemes like MSP. All these are long-term measures. And second is, it can be checked by proper monetary policy. Demand and supply is sometimes adjusted by proper monetary policy, by reducing the interest rate or increasing the interest rate. Fine. Now the point is, there are different types of inflations. One is called slow inflation. That means prices rise at a very slow rate, that is acceptable. Second is galloping inflation, hyperinflation, when inflation is at a high rate, 20%, 30%, 100%, 200%, 300%. We call that it is a hyperinflation or a galloping inflation. Sometimes inflation is because of, we call that bottleneck inflation. Bottleneck inflation is sometimes, suppose we are getting a regular supply from some place by road, and the road is blocked for some maybe 1 day or 2 days or for 5 days or 10 days. So it is bottleneck problem because of the closure of the road, because of bad weather or some other problems, the goods available in that particular market are not available. So we call that it is bottleneck inflation. one word we commonly use as core inflation. What is core inflation? When we talk about the inflation, we say that it is the persistent rise in prices of the goods and services. Fine. That is overall, all goods and services. But there are certain goods and services like food grains, vegetables, fruits, or we can say cost of crude oil. These are the goods which are beyond the control of the government of India. For example, vegetables and fruits. These are seasonal in nature. In some particular season, they are available in abundance, so the prices will fall. In particular, in off season, they are not available in good quantities, so prices will increase. And these are transitory. They are not permanent. They are for a shorter period of time. The same way we have import of bills. Suppose crude oil, the prices of the crude oil increase. The increase or decrease of prices of the crude oil doesn't depend with the RBI or doesn't depend with the government of India. So if you keep those items which are beyond the control of RBI or beyond the control of the Indian government away from the basket of goods and services, while calculating the prices or measuring the increase or decrease of prices, those goods, those type of inflation is called core inflation. So we can say inflation or prices increase or decrease other than fluctuating goods and services. उसमें क्या आता है? उसमें आता है fruits and vegetables, crude oil. That is called core inflation. One more important term in this inflation chapter is stagflation. Normally, we should keep in mind, it is a maxim that when there is an inflation at a reasonable rate is a good sign for an economy. You should always remember it. What does it mean? Inflation means prices are rising. That means there is a good demand. When there is a good demand, investors keep on investing, and when the investors keep on investing, that means more production, more employment. So we say when inflation increases, unemployment decreases. So in other words, we say the trade-off between inflation and unemployment. If inflation increases, unemployment decreases. But there are certain situations when there is a small growth in GDP, there is a reasonable increase in inflation, but at the same time unemployment does not decrease. That type of situation, is called stagflation. That is when it is unconventional. Unconventional means against the principle of increase in inflation, decrease in unemployment. But when there is no decrease in unemployment, we say this situation is called stagflation. Or we can say this is against the Phillips curve. ये Phillips curve भी you have to keep in mind, you have to remember what is Phillips curve. Simultaneous occurrence of high inflation and slow economic growth, often accompanied by high unemployment, उसको stagflation कहते हैं. But जहाँ ये है increase in inflation and decrease in unemployment, that is called Phillips curve. Then we have a term known as inflationary gap. What is inflationary gap? Inflationary gap when some government presents a budget. In the budget they say we have so much of resources and so much of expenses. Fine. But at the end of the day or end of the year, they fall short of prices. Then what they say, what is the reason? Well, they say when we had made certain estimates of the expenditure, but actually when we took time by that time there was increase in cost of the goods. So that is why the amounts earmarked for that project fall short of certain amount. That amount which they are compelled to go for borrowing, which is called deficit, that is called inflationary gap. Fine. Again, coming to Phillips curve. What is Phillips curve? It is a graphic curve which advocates a relationship between inflation and unemployment in an economy. So keep two things in mind. Whenever you mention about the Phillips curve, you should keep in mind that it is a graphic representation of increase in inflation, decrease in unemployment. So simple. Phillips was the name of the economist who devised this phenomenon in the shape of a graph. That is why it is called Phillips curve. But at the same time, in 1970, we had two American economists named Milton Friedman and Nobel laureate, and Edmund Phelps, Phelps, Phelps. They challenged the thesis of Phillips. They say that the trade-off between inflation and unemployment is temporary in nature. It is not everlasting. They say there is a situation, there is a stage at what time this principle, this funda doesn't work, because then there is no trade-off between the inflation and unemployment. And that is called potential output is usually called the natural rate of unemployment, and that is called non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, NARO, non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. ये आपने याद रखना है. Second word is reflation. What is reflation? It is a situation often deliberately brought by the government. Inflation deliberately brought by the government to reduce unemployment and increase the demand for higher public expenditures. Tax cuts, increase rate cuts. This is called reflation. And finally, we have another type of inflation called inflation targeting. So what is inflation targeting? Inflation targeting is done by in India and other near about 10 countries in the world, where the policy of the central bank, as RBI in the case of India, they target what should be the inflation in the country. So we have an agreement between Reserve Bank of India and the Government of India that the Reserve Bank of India has to take necessary measures so that the retail inflation is 4% plus minus 2%. That means it can go either down to 2% or it can go up to 6%. Or we can say retail inflation in our country, which is being monitored and regulated by Reserve Bank of India, has to ensure that the inflation rate remains between 2 and 6%. In case of there is breach in this, if the inflation falls below 2% or it goes up 6% consecutively for 3 quarters, then it is treated that the RBI has failed in its duties to discharge the to maintain the inflation. So it has to submit an explanatory note to the government, reasons why it crossed that 6 or 2% or 6% point, and give us strategies how it can regulate and how it can ensure that it comes within that bracket. This type of inflation is called inflation targeting. So you should know India में क्या है. India में we RBI, we have an inflation target. After every 5 years, this agreement is renewed or reviewed between Government of India and the Reserve Bank of India. Fine. So this was inflation targeting. One more term which the aspirants should note is about GDP deflator. GDP deflator. So we can say sometimes inflation can also be measured by knowing the GDP deflator. What is GDP deflator? It is simple. It is the ratio between GDP at current prices and GDP at constant prices. What does constant prices mean? Constant prices means the prices of the goods at the base year. Base year for in the case of India or in CPI, it is 2012. So what were the prices at 2012 and what are the current prices? The ratio between the two gives the GDP deflator. So we can say inflation can be also measured by knowing the GDP deflator. Fine. One more term is imported inflation. What is imported inflation? Imported inflation is the inflation which is mainly caused due to the certain happenings because of imports. Certain happenings abroad, maybe increase in crude oil prices, maybe shortage in the supply of goods from across the border, maybe in depreciation of our currency vis-a-vis foreign currencies. So this type of inflation, which is due to the imports or due to the happenings outside our country, is called imported inflation. This was all what is inflation and what are its types. Now, how you measure the inflation? Inflation is measured in India by, we call that wholesale price index and consumer price index, WPI and CPI. Wholesale price index is the price of the goods at the wholesale level, when the goods are sold at the wholesale level. While as CPI is inflation at retail level. Retail means when the goods are sold to the consumers like you and me. Who calculates? Wholesale price is calculated by Office of the Economic Advisor, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Wholesale price index, market. But consumer price index is calculated by National Statistics Office, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. They compute consumer price index. Base year. Base year in the case of wholesale price index is 2011-2012. While in the case of CPI, consumer price index, it is 2012. Now the point is, there are n number of commodities, goods and services in the country. तो कैसे ये सबको मेजर करते हैं, सबके प्राइसेस नोट करते हैं? नो. In wholesale price index, there are around 697 commodities which I have identified, for which the prices are recorded and compared with the base year, compared with the previous month, or compared with the previous year. While in the case of CPI, there are around 399, or we can say 400 odd, 300 to 400 items whose prices are checked, collated and compared. But the point is categories. Wholesale price index में क्या है? We have primary articles, manufactured products, fuel and power. These are the three segments in which the goods are classified. What is important in the case of wholesale price index? Because each product is given weightage. In the case of wholesale price index, highest weightage is given to the manufactured products, followed by primary articles, then fuel and power. That means manufactured items are given the highest weightage, on the basis of which they come out with the wholesale price index, or we can say they come out with the inflation in wholesale prices. But in the case of consumer price index, the highest weightage is food and beverages, then followed by pan, tobacco, intoxicants, clothing and footwear, housing, fuel and light. In the case of consumer price index, highest weightage is for food and beverages. Fine. Now point is, what is the impact of increase in food items? So in the case of wholesale price index, impact of increase in food items is less in wholesale price index, while as in CPI it is more, because the weightage in CPI is more for food and beverages, while as in the case of wholesale price index, weightage is more for manufactured goods. One more point we must note, that in the case of wholesale price index, services are not included. Services like housing, medical services, education, the transport, banking. While as in the case of consumer price index, these services are included while computing the prices. Is wholesale price inflation index targeted? Does government have any target? No. While as in the case of CPI, it has a target. That is why we call targeted inflation, 2%, 4%, around 2% with plus minus possible. So this was the difference between wholesale price index and consumer price index. Sometimes we also see in the newspaper about the consumer food price index. That is the same. In that index we compute the prices of only food items, no other items. So by computing that, we come out with what is the food inflation, how much is food inflation. Before I go further, I would like to talk about base year. What is base year? Suppose in the case of wholesale price index, base year is 2011-12, and in the case of CPI it is 2012. Base year is to be revised after every 5 years. Sometimes it is being revised late. When there is a review of base year, they also at that time they also review the items to be included in the commodities to be whose prices are to be computed for the purpose of inflation. For example, if you go over 10 years back, we didn't have varieties of these mobile phones. We had ordinary mobile phone in the list. Same way, food items. Now the consumption of food items and the expenditure on non-food items has increased. So the type of food items, the diversity in food items has increased. So what type of food items are to be included, this is being decided at the time of review of these items. And on the base year, the prices, the index is treated as 100. Then a year after that, the prices are, suppose today we calculate the prices of the goods, we compare it with the base year, then see how much is the increase. And the last year also we have seen the prices of the goods last year, then compared with the base year, then the difference between these 2 years gives the actual inflation between the 2 years. That is the purpose of base year. Similarly, as I said you that in the case of wholesale price index, the manufactured items has the highest weightage, whereas in the case of consumer price index, food and beverages has the highest weightage. Government has constituted a working group for the base year revision of the current series of wholesale price index. Government is planning to shift the base year from 2011-12 to 2022-23. In this case, a working group will be chaired by Professor Ramesh Chand, who is the member of WPI. Besides suggesting for the change in the base year, he has been tasked with also the idea of switching from wholesale price index to producer price index, PPI. Now government is contemplating that we should do away with wholesale price index. Instead of this, we should think about calculating producer's price index. So it is important for us to know what is producer's price index. It is not implemented yet, but what they envisage in it. First, what is producer's price index? It measures the price changes at the producer level, while as wholesale price index is at the wholesale level. So this is the difference. Secondly, in wholesale price index there is no inclusion of service sector, while as in the producer's price index there will be inclusion of the service sector. Base year it is not implemented yet, so base year point is not there. This is all I had to share you about the inflation. One more thing I want to add, that there is a term called a real interest rate. What is real interest rate? Suppose today banks charge say 10% or 8% interest on certain loan, or banks give 8% on your deposits. But at the same time we know that today the rate of the inflation rate is say 4%. So if they are giving me 8%, that means inflation is 4%. That means I am getting only 4% benefit from the bank. The same way, if the banks charge me on loan say 8%, and the inflation is 4%, that means actual real interest rate is only 4%. So you should remember that real interest rate is the nominal interest rate minus inflation. That is called a real interest rate. Fine. Further, in the case of consumer price index, as I already told you, that this is being calculated by Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, National Statistics Office. While as there are other variants of CPI, consumer price index, like consumer price index for industrial workers, consumer price index for rural laborers, consumer price index for agricultural laborers. These type of indexes are computed or issued by Labor Ministry. You should keep a note of it. It can be asked in the exam. So this type of CPI indices are issued by the Labor Ministry, and they have a different base year. For example, in the case of CPI industrial workers, base year has been shifted from 2001 to 2016, and number of items which they are included, they vary from one variant to other variant. Same way for rural labor, it is base year is 1986 to 87. Now sometimes there is a debate, there is a question whether should there be a headline inflation or core inflation. Headline inflation means when you are taking all the items in consideration, then come out with the inflation rate. Core inflation is the inflation of those goods and commodities in which the frequent fluctuating goods and services are excluded. For example, fruits and vegetables, crude oil, which are beyond the purview of the government, or which are the purview of the RBI, or which are in transitory for small transit period. So that is called core inflation. There is some argument shows in the case of say big industrialists. Say for example, someone is dealing with steel. For him, if there is an inflation due to the food items, it hardly matters for him. So he for such a type of activities, for such type of persons, entrepreneurs, they say that we should do away with the core inflation. We should do away with the headline inflation. We should consider only core inflation. This is all I had to share you about the inflation. And secondly, we must also know what are the impact of inflation. Inflation impact on creditors and debtors. Lenders suffer and borrowers benefit out of inflation. Because when a lender means bank, when they give a loan to a person, they get a fixed amount of interest, say 8%, 7% for that tenure. And if there is an inflation, that means the real return to the bank will be lesser. So we say that lenders suffer and creditors, debtors, they get benefited. Same way, suppose I purchase a car at 7% interest rate loan, and maybe after 2 months, 3 months there is inflation, and because of that the price of the car has increased. Same car. That means the price of the car has increased because of inflation, but I am enjoying the same car by paying the interest at the old rates. That means this inflation at this time, as a creditor, as a borrower, I am benefited. So these sometimes. And secondly, taxes. As you know, the direct taxes are on ad valorem. Ad valorem means as per face value. When there is an inflation, cost of the goods increases, but when we have to pay GST is on the face value. That means your absolute terms में आपका टैक्स ज़्यादा लगता है. Same way, when there is an increase in inflation, your salary increases because of DA increases. That compels you to pay more tax, because because of inflation your absolute income increases, so you have to pay more income tax. So you should know both positives and negatives of these. This is all I have to share you about inflation. In case you have any doubt, please don't hesitate in texting me on phone number 94191860888, or you can log on to Nancy Foundation website. There my particulars are given. You can send an email or you can call me. Please don't forget to share and subscribe this. Thank you.